A PBS Christmas special relates the story about a moment of peace during a time of war. The Great War, World War I in 1914 is when the story takes place. The program All is Calm, the Christmas Truce of 1914, tells a story of enemies facing each other. British and French allies on one side, Germans on the other, and their fighting stops for some extraordinary reasons. It's based on a true story and is referred to as a docu-musical. We'll be meeting a singer from Plattsburgh, New York with strong ties to this show. But first, let's speak with the writer and director of the musical. He's the founding artistic director of Theater Lake in Minneapolis, Peter Rothstein. Hello, Peter.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, and it's an absolutely beautiful story this musical relates. What can you tell us about the story?
In the first year of World War I, 1914, as winter set in, the men realized they wouldn't be going home for Christmas as they were promised. And as the holidays approached, they began to sing to one another from one side of the no man's land to the other. And it became this round robin of Christmas carols from one side to the next. And on Christmas Day, as legend has it, a German soldier put down his rifle and stepped out of his trench into no man's land. And others followed.
Looking out over the parapet, we could see that he had left his trench and was standing on the top bank, in the open and in full view. He then walked towards us and stood in the middle of no man's land.
And at various points along the Western Front that year, the men celebrated Christmas together. They played soccer, they sang carols, they exchanged gifts of tobacco and chocolate. And in certain places, we know that they spent the day burying each other's dead. It was a remarkable event that happened that was never repeated.
But how did this happen amongst enemies during wartime?
I believe music is what instigated the Christmas truce. The men were promised they would be home by Christmas, so they felt they had been lied to. They also, the conditions in the trenches, especially for the Allied side, were horrendous that first winter of the war. The men were living in mud up to their knees. More men actually died from influenza and malnutrition the first year of the war than from enemy combat. So they felt that they were not being taken care of, and they began to feel like they had more in common with their enemy than they did with their commanding officers. And so I believe that sense of camaraderie that was established through music from one side of the trench to the other is ultimately what laid the grounds for the Christmas truce to actually happen.
And now it's more than 100 years later. Why do you think this story is worth telling?
You know, at this time of year, we often use expressions peace on earth, goodwill towards all, hope, joy. I can't think of another story actually that encapsulates those ideas more than the Christmas truce. And it's real. It's not a piece of fiction. It actually happened.
One German said to me,
"Do you know there's a Essex Road in London East?"
"Yes, my uncle had a shoe repairing shop there."
That's funny. There's a barber shop on the other side where I used to work.
I think these men who exercised peace that day were heroic, yet their names didn't end up in history books. There are not monuments erected to them because they were the lowest of the ranks. But that day, it took a lot more courage to exercise peace than to exercise war. And I want their names to be said out loud. I want them to have their rightful place in history.
I found the humanity in the story so powerful, how we all have things in common as human beings, and those commonalities come to the surface even when facing an enemy during a war. What does this story say about humanity to you?
Each year when we're rehearsing this piece, we come to the moment where we begin the truce. And the legend, although there's documentation, is that the truce began with a German soldier putting down his rifle and emerging from the trenches and stepping into no man's land with his hands in the air singing Silent Night or Stille Nacht. And I tried to make the cast just stop for a minute and think about the courage of that moment. He was trusting that his enemy was not going to fire. There had been resentment, for all we know. He may have lost a brother, a friend, a father to that enemy. But he's trusting that that enemy is going to choose peace in that moment. And not only trusting that one enemy, but the hundreds of men along that front line. He's trusting that not one of them is going to fire.
Silent night, silent night, silent, holy night, holy night, all is calm.
I can't imagine the courage and the trust in order to do that. And I think here we are where our country is incredibly divided right now. We are so divisive. We feel like our enemies are across the street, are in our workplace. I can't imagine that we can't somehow see beyond our divisiveness. If we look at this moment in history where these men chose trust, chose hope, chose peace, we can do the same. I have to believe that.
Well, that makes this year a very important time to be viewing your musical. And your musical also has an air of authenticity because you use the words of actual soldiers taken from their letters, their diaries, and poems. What was the motivation to write the script from historical documents?
I had been wanting to write a piece about the Christmas Truce for a number of years, but I was struggling with the best way to do that because the climax of this story is the lack of conflict. It's a moment of peace, which doesn't make for great drama. So I knew that I wanted to find a non-traditional storytelling technique to tell this story. So I booked a trip to the Western Front. I chose to do that. Actually, the night we invaded Iraq, I said, I need to move this story to the front burner, and I bought a ticket to the Western Front and began my research. And shortly after, I thought, if I could tell this story entirely in their words, it would have much more power and much more meaning than any fictitious characters I would create.
We are having another truce on New Year's Day as the Germans want to see how the photos come out.
We all sang every song we could think of. A bonfire was lit, and everyone walked about as though it were a picnic.
The show is told entirely in the words of the men who were there and in their songs, the songs they would have sung together.
A resident of Plattsburgh, New York, performed in the show All Is Calm in its very earliest stages. With the men's vocal ensemble Cantus, Tom McNichols performed in the Minnesota Public Radio premiere broadcast of the show when it was a radio drama in 2007. In 2008, he sang on the original cast recording of the show. He performed in the national tour of the show as a stage musical in 2017, and in 2018, he appeared in the off-Broadway version that won a Drama Desk Award for unique theatrical experience. Thanks for joining us, Tom.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Music can do so much. What do you think, Tom, this story tells us about the power of music?
I mean, the beautiful part here is that it transcended the languages. There are reports that one of the truces started because someone sang Stille Nacht, which is silent night. And then the French soldiers also joined in, and they knew all of these songs together, even though they were in their own language, just a few hundred miles apart.
Well, Tom, how do you relate to the story and the message of the show?
Well, I was not fighting in trenches at 18 and 19 years old. I can't imagine what that was actually like. But we've done a lot of study over the years on these various soldiers, really gotten it into in depth of what this was like. And I can say that I have definitely been moved on stage singing in a group of guys. So I can only imagine how much peace that brought to them, at least, if not for a very short period of time.
And I see you spent some time in Grand Central Station. What's the story behind this video you're sharing with us?
That was actually just for fun. When I first moved to New York for a couple of years, I actually did a lot of busking in the subway, which is exactly what that is, those performances underground. So this was the 2018 off-Broadway cast. One of the days between performances, I had convinced everyone to join me. So we all hopped on the subway. We went uptown to Grand Central. We found one of the domed areas right off of the main terminal. And we went at singing the title piece to the show, the Silent Night arrangement by Eric Light. It just started out as a fun little marketing piece, and then next thing you know, people really seemed to enjoy it. So we went and did it in a few places before the police stopped us.
It's too bad they stopped you. You guys sounded so beautiful singing that. But I understand that you are not in the national program that's airing on PBS. Why was that decision made?
Well, there's a lot of schedules that go into play. Many parts of my opera career booked a couple of years in advance. So unfortunately, I just had a conflict and wasn't able to be a part of that production.
Well, in spite of your not being in the PBS show, would you recommend we view it?
Oh, absolutely. It's something that I want to come back to myself year after year. It's a beautifully intimate story. It transcends all sorts of humanity, especially at the holiday season. So I highly recommend it to anybody.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing the whole show, and I want to thank you, Tom and Peter, for helping us make some new holiday memories with this special story.
Thank you so much.
Very good. Thanks for having me. I hope you enjoy the show.
Sure thing. We can all enjoy the show, All is Calm, the Christmas Truce of 1914 on Mountain Lake PBS. It airs Thursday, December 23rd at 1 p.m., part of our Learning at Home programming for students and families. PBS Learning Media is offering a variety of educational resources, videos, and discussion questions for students about the musical. You'll find the activities at mountainlake.org.
Spotlight is supported by the Glenn and Carol Pearsall Adirondack Foundation, dedicated to improving the quality of life for year-round residents of the Adirondack Park.